Welcome to the deep dive. Uranium. Today, it's synonymous with a massive power generation, but its origins are surprisingly humble. Back in 1789, Martin Heinrich Klaproth identified it as an oxide. And there was even a bit of, head-scratching about whether it was a true metal.
Right, a fundamental question back then.
And for over a century, its main job was adding green and yellow tints to glass and porcelain.
Yeah.
Quite a contrast to its later impact, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's a remarkable shift, isn't it?
Uh-huh.
From a decorative element to something that, fundamentally altered the geopolitical landscape and our understanding of energy.
Definitely.
And what's truly captivating is that even in those early days, figuring out where to find uranium and how to extract it was already a complex and ingenious endeavor.
And that's exactly the rabbit hole we're going down today. We've got J.H. Gittus' 1963 book, simply titled Uranium.
A classic source.
We're going to meticulously explore the initial chapters, focusing on uranium ores and how they were first concentrated. Think of it as stepping back in time, to understand the foundational knowledge and techniques used to harness this incredibly potent element. Our aim is to uncover how uranium transitioned from a geological curiosity to a usable resource.
And these early chapters are indeed the bedrock of the entire story. They lay out everything from uranium's natural occurrence within the Earth's crust to those crucial first steps in isolating and increasing its concentration.
Crucial steps.
It's essential context for appreciating the more advanced processes that followed later on.
Okay, let's dive into Chapter 1 then. Ores. Right off the bat, Gittus makes it clear that uranium isn't exactly, abundant.
Not at all.
We're talking about a concentration of roughly 0.00003% in the Earth's crust.
Tiny. Just minuscule amounts, really, on average.
So while it's present, finding it in concentrations high enough to be economically viable was quite a challenge. It wasn't evenly distributed, was it?
No, definitely not. Commercially exploitable deposits where the uranium content justifies the effort of extraction are relatively scarce.
Right.
And concentrated in specific geological settings. Gittus points to some key historical areas for these richer ores. Shinkolabwe in the Congo,
Okay.
Great Bear Lake in Canada, and Joachimsthal, now part of the Czech Republic.
Yes.
These locations were the primary focus of early uranium seekers. What's fascinating is that the geological conditions in these places, formed over vast stretches of time, somehow favored the accumulation of this relatively rare element.
And what about the actual stuff we're looking for? I keep hearing about uraninite and pitchblende. Are these the key uranium-bearing minerals?
Precisely. Uraninite, often called pitchblende due to its dark, sort of resin-like appearance, was the most commonly reported uranium mineral in these early surveys.
Pitchblende, right.
Chemically, it's primarily uranium dioxide, UO2, and triuranium octoxide, U3O8. This chemical composition is important because these are relatively stable oxides,
Okay.
which, as we'll discuss later, influence the early chemical extraction methods.
Makes sense.
Gittus also mentions secondary minerals, like carnotite, which is easily recognizable by its bright yellow color and contains vanadium alongside uranium.
Oh, yeah, I think I've seen pictures. Very distinctive.
If you've ever seen vivid yellow rocks in geological displays, there's a good chance it was carnotite or a similar secondary uranium mineral.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. Where do these uranium-rich minerals actually hang out? Is it just random, or are there specific geological environments we should be looking at?
Oh, it's far from random. Chapter 1 emphasizes the critical role of geology in understanding uranium deposits.
Okay.
We learned that ancient Precambrian rocks, the very foundations of our continents, and detrital sediments, essentially accumulations of weathered rock material, are primary hosts for uranium minerals.
Mostly really old rocks.
Very old rocks, yeah.
Yeah.
The geological processes that formed these rocks millions, even billions of years ago created environments where uranium could become concentrated. Think of it like certain types of soil being better for growing specific plants.
Good analogy. So different parts of the world, with their unique geological histories, became uranium hotspots. Gittus mentions these tectonic geographical units. Can you paint a picture of what those are?
Certainly. Gittus identifies 5 main global zones where uranium deposits tend to cluster. First, the granitic intrusions of Appalachian Age, found in Western Europe and parts of North America.
Okay, Appalachian Age.
Second, the borders of the African Shield, a vast expanse of very old crystalline rocks.
Right.
Third, the western and southern edges of the Canadian Shield, another enormous Precambrian structure.
Oh, great.
Fourth, the American Cordillera, the massive chain of mountain ranges along the western side of the Americas.
The Rockies and Andes, basically.
Exactly. And finally, granitic intrusions in Australia. These are the major geological neighborhoods where the conditions were right for uranium to accumulate in more significant amounts.
It's almost like uranium had its preferred geological addresses. And the book then dives into specific examples within these regions. Let's take a quick world tour. Argentina, for example. What did they find there?
In Argentina, Gittus highlights the San Santiago mine and pitchblende deposits in the Mendoza province.
Mendoza, okay.
These deposits often occur as veins within crystalline schists and quartzites, indicating that the uranium was likely deposited by hydrothermal fluids circulating through these rocks, hot water-carrying minerals.
And France. We know France is a major player in nuclear energy today. What were their early finds?
Indeed. Gittus mentions the Le Chaux district and the Le Creusille deposits, both known for their pitchblende.
Pitchblende again.
Yes. Interestingly, many French deposits are associated with granitic formations and often contain other minerals like fluorite and silica in the surrounding rock.
Ah, the gangue minerals.
Precisely the gangue, which would have influenced the extraction processes they later developed, you see.
Makes sense. Moving over to India, what was the story there?
India presented a slightly different scenario with generally lower-grade disseminated deposits, kind of spread out.
Okay, lower grade.
However, pitchblende was found in pegmatites, which are very coarse-grained igneous rocks, and also in monazite sands along the coast.
Monazite sands. Aren't they also known for thorium?
Exactly. It's worth noting that the monazite sands were primarily of interest for their thorium content, another radioactive element, but uranium was there too.
Italy. Uranium in Italy isn't something that immediately comes to mind.
No, perhaps not. But the Montecatini and Semi-Cu mining operations in the Piedmont Maritime Alps are mentioned.
Ah.
These were explored in the late 1940s and contained pitchblende in vein systems, again pointing to that hydrothermal activity as a concentrating mechanism.
South Korea also gets a mention, with some rather unusual-sounding minerals.
Yes. Gittus lists carnotite, there's that yellow one again, samskite, torbanite, and uranophane as uranium-bearing minerals identified in South Korean ore deposits.
Wow, quite a list.
These are often secondary minerals, meaning they formed from the alteration of primary uranium minerals due to weathering and groundwater interaction.
Okay, so formed later, Portugal and Spain also had their early uranium discoveries.
Yes. Portugal's Urgerica and Bica mines were noted for their pitchblende occurrences, showing some early promise in terms of production. In Spain, the focus was on uraniferous pegmatites in the Alborana region and pitchblende in the Monasterio zone, highlighting the diverse geological settings where uranium could be found.
And closer to Gittus's home, Great Britain. Any major finds?
The book mentions occurrences of pitchblende in Cornwall and Devon.
Ah, Cornwall, tin mining country.
Exactly. Though these were often more localized and not consistently economic for large-scale extraction compared to some of the other regions we've discussed. More like pockets.
I see. Of course, Canada played a pivotal role in the early uranium story, didn't it?
Absolutely. A huge role. The regions along the borders and in southern margins of the Canadian Shield were major sources.
Right, that Canadian Shield again?
The Great Bear Lake District, famous for the El Dorado mine, and the Beaver Lodge District were particularly significant, with both pitchblende and uraninite being the primary ores. These deposits were crucial for the early nuclear programs.
Really important sources then. Last but certainly not least in our global snapshot, the USA, especially the Colorado Plateau. That conjures up images from old westerns.
You're right, it does. The Colorado Plateau was, and remains, a very important uranium region. Gittus details various districts like Ambrosia Lake and the Uravan Mineral Belt.
Thanks names.
Where uranium was often found in sandstone formations. Other notable districts span Wyoming, South Dakota, Washington, Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico.
Wow, spread out.
With the uranium hosted in a variety of rock types, including sandstone, volcaniclastics, and quartzite, reflecting different geological processes at play.
And to really highlight this variety, the book includes Table 1.2, outlining the mineral character of U.S. uranium deposits. It's clear that finding uranium wasn't just about stumbling across pitchblende.
Exactly. The table categorizes deposits based on their host rock and the associated minerals, or gangue, as you said. We see types ranging from those with silica and iron oxide minerals to others with significant amounts of fluorite or carbonate, some even associated with gold-bearing pyrite.
Gold, too. Interesting.
And then there's type E, where uranium minerals occur with little to no other significant minerals, just relatively clean ore. This diversity in the geological and mineralogical context, directly impacted the methods needed to extract and concentrate the uranium later on. One size definitely didn't fit all.
Fascinating to see how geology dictated those early hunts for uranium. So once you had an idea of where to look, how did they actually find it? That leads us to Chapter 2, Detection, Exploration, and Mining.
I imagine it wasn't always as simple as waving a Geiger counter around.
No, not initially. In the very early days, detection relied heavily on traditional mineralogical skills. Prospectors needed a keen eye
Right.
and knowledge of what these uranium-bearing minerals looked like, distinguishing them from other dark, heavy minerals.
Tricky.
It was only with the later understanding of radioactivity that more sophisticated instruments came into play.
And those instruments were the Geiger and scintillation counters. They sound like relics of the atomic age, but crucial, I guess. Oh, absolutely essential tools for field detection. Geiger counters, being relatively robust and portable, were among the first widely used to detect the elevated radiation levels associated with uranium ores.
The classic clicking sound.
Exactly. Scintillation counters, which are more sensitive and could differentiate between different types of radiation, came later and offered enhanced detection capabilities. More sophisticated.
Okay, so you've got your detector. What was the process of actually locating an economically viable deposit? It sounds like a very involved undertaking.
It was indeed a multi-stage process, as Gittus explains in the exploration section. It began with preliminary reconnaissance.
Just looking around?
Pretty much. Surveying large areas to identify regions with promising geological characteristics. This was followed by more detailed geological studies, including mapping and sampling.
Getting more focused.
Then came systematic surveys, which could be aerial, using radiation detectors mounted on aircraft to cover large tracts of land quickly.
Flying grids, maybe?
Yes, something like that. Or ground-based, with prospectors conducting detailed surveys on foot using those Geiger or scintillation counters.
Right.
If radioactive anomalies were discovered, drilling and sampling were necessary to determine the depth, extent, and grade of the ore body. How much is really there?
The crucial question.
Ultimately, this data was used to estimate the overall ore reserves. Throughout this entire process, the creation and analysis of topographical and geological maps were crucial for understanding the subsurface, putting it all together.
All right, you've identified a deposit. Now comes the physically demanding part, getting the ore out of the ground. The book discusses different categories of uranium mines in the USA. What were the main distinctions?
Gittus categorized them based on the geometry and depth of the ore body. There were deep and regular deposits, like those found in the Big Indian Wash area,
Okay.
where the ore occurred in relatively continuous and predictable layers, easier to plan in theory. Then there were shallow and irregular deposits, common in the saltwash region, often containing carnotite and found in more discontinuous formations closer to the surface. Patty?
Harder to follow the ore?
Could be. Finally, there were open pit mines, used for deposits that were very close to the surface with minimal overlying rock, as seen in the Gas Hills area.
Just strip off the top layer.
Exactly. Each type of deposit required different mining techniques.
For those deep and regular deposits, they employed techniques like room and pillar and longwall retreat mining. Can you visualize how those would have worked?
Sure. In room and pillar mining, you'd excavate a network of tunnels or rooms within the ore body,
Okay.
leaving behind pillars of unmined ore to support the roof of the mine, like a grid underground.
Got it. And longwall retreat.
Longwall retreat mining, which figure 2.3 illustrates with the Mia Vita mine as an example, involved extracting large panels of ore in a continuous operation.
A whole face at once.
Pretty much, allowing the roof to collapse behind as the mining phase advanced and the miners retreated. Gittus mentions that in the Mia Vita mine, typical room dimensions were around 20 feet wide and up to 20 feet high,
Decent size.
with pillars ranging from 80 to 150 feet in length. These methods allowed access to deeper, more consistent ore bodies.
The shallow, irregular deposits sound a bit less like a structured underground operation and more like selectively digging into exposed ore.
That's a fair assessment. These deposits, often rich in those brightly colored carnotite minerals, were frequently mined using adits,
It's...
horizontal tunnels driven into the side of a hill or cliff face to access the ore.
Oh.
Because they were closer to the surface, the overall mining costs were generally lower compared to the deep underground mines, but the irregular nature of the deposits could make planning and extraction more challenging. You follow the ore where it leads.
And the open pit mines, those are the huge excavations we often associate with modern mining operations.
Exactly. When the uranium ore was located very close to the surface, with only a thin layer of overburdened the waste rock above the ore.
Right.
Open pit mining was the most economical and efficient approach. Large earth-moving equipment could be used to remove the overburden and then extract the ore, as was the case in the Gas Hills area. Allows for extraction of large volumes relatively quickly.
The chapter also briefly touches on Australian mining at Radium Hill. That sounds like it involved quite deep underground work.
Yes, at Radium Hill in South Australia, the mining operations extended to significant depths, around 1,400 feet below the surface.
Wow, that's deep for that era.
It indicates a substantial investment and effort to extract the uranium, suggesting a relatively high-grade or extensive deposit that justified such deep underground workings.
Okay, so we've successfully extracted the uranium ore from the ground. But it's not pure uranium, right? It's mixed with lots of rock.
Oh, absolutely not. It's still mostly waste rock.
That brings us to Chapter 3, Ore Concentration. This is where the real separation science begins.
Precisely. The primary goal of ore concentration is to significantly increase the percentage of uranium in the material by removing the unwanted rock and minerals.
Get rid of the junk.
Essentially, yes. This reduces the overall volume and mass that needs to be transported and processed further, making the subsequent refining stages more efficient and cost-effective. Think of it as separating the wheat from the chaff, but on an industrial scale.
And the book outlines several different approaches to achieve this concentration. It wasn't just one method.
Indeed. Section 3.2 provides a summary highlighting physical beneficiation, chemical leaching using both acidic and alkaline solutions, ion exchange, and solvent extraction as the main techniques employed at the time.
A whole toolkit.
And the selection of the most appropriate method depended largely on the specific mineralogy and chemical composition of the ore being processed. What kind of rock is it in? What other minerals are present?
Makes sense. Let's start with physical beneficiation. That sounds like using mechanical techniques, maybe density or something.
That's the basic principle. Methods like gravity concentration exploit the difference in density between the heavier uranium minerals and the lighter waste rock.
Like panning for gold, but industrial.
Sorta, yeah. Gittus points out that ores from the El Dorado mine in Canada and Shinkolobwe in the Congo were particularly well suited to gravity concentration due to the high specific gravity of their uranium minerals.
Lucky them.
Magnetic separation could also be employed if the ore contained magnetic impurities that could be removed using magnetic fields.
Okay.
Another interesting technique mentioned is radioactive sorting, where individual pieces of ore are passed by a radiation detector.
Really? Piece by piece?
Well, maybe not tiny pieces, but chunks. And those with a higher level of radioactivity, indicating a higher uranium content, are automatically separated from the lower grade material. Table 3.1 provides an example of how this relatively simple method could significantly upgrade the uranium content of the sorted product.
Clever. Now we move on to the chemical methods, starting with acid leaching. This sounds like dissolving the uranium out of the ore matrix.
That's the core idea. Acid leaching, often using sulfuric acid, was a widely applied method for many types of uranium ores.
Sulfuric acid. Nasty stuff, but effective.
Very effective for uranium. Several factors significantly influence the efficiency of this process. Generally, higher temperatures increased the rate at which uranium minerals dissolved,
Makes sense chemically.
although the practical limits were determined by energy costs and equipment limitations. Can the equipment handle the heat and acid?
Right.
The concentration of the acid was also a critical parameter, with an optimal pH typically falling in the range of 1 to 1.8. Too much or too little wasn't ideal.
A sweet spot.
A mechanical agitation and aeration, essentially stirring the slurry and bubbling air or oxygen through it, helped to ensure good contact between the acid solution and the finely ground ore particles, promoting the dissolution of the uranium.
Keep everything moving and reacting.
Yes, exactly. Figure 3.2 illustrates the relationship between acid concentration and uranium extraction efficiency. Interestingly, Gittus mentions pilot plant studies conducted at Daggafontein in South Africa that achieved remarkably high uranium recoveries.
How high?
Using acid leaching at elevated temperatures of 450 degrees C under pressure. Quite extreme conditions.
Wow, yeah, that's hot. The book then provides some specific, real-world examples of acid leaching in operation, such as at the Bycroft and Faraday mines in Ontario.
Yes, these mines employed sodium chlorate as an oxidant in their sulfuric acid leaching process.
An oxidant? Why was that needed?
An oxidant is crucial because it helps to convert the uranium into a higher oxidation state, typically from UIV to UVI.
Okay.
And UVI forms more soluble sulfate complexes, thus increasing the amount of uranium that dissolves into the leach solution. Figure 3.4 presents a simplified flow sheet of this specific process.
Ah, okay. Helps it dissolve better.
Precisely. Similarly, at the Milliken Lade Mill, also in Ontario, the leaching took place in large agitated tanks called pachucas. Yeah, tall cylindrical tanks, often agitated with compressed air, using sulfuric acid and sodium chlorate as the oxidant.
And then there's this concept of oxidizing leaches. It seems like creating the right chemical environment to make the uranium soluble was absolutely key.
Absolutely fundamental. Oxidizing agents, such as ferric iron, iron 3, often used in conjunction with air or oxygen, played a vital role in oxidizing the uranium to its more soluble UVI form.
Right.
Figure 3.6 shows a flow sheet for a leach solution regeneration plant, illustrating how ferric iron could be utilized and then regenerated within the leaching circuit, making the process more efficient. You reuse the iron.
Smart recycling. Now, what if the ore contained a significant amount of carbonate minerals, like limestone? That would react with the acid, right?
Exactly. It would consume huge amounts of acid, making acid leaching uneconomical. That's where alkaline leaching comes into play.
So a different chemical approach.
Correct. Alkaline leaching, typically using solutions of sodium carbonate, was the preferred method for ores with a high carbonate content. However, alkaline leaching generally required higher operating temperatures and pressures compared to acid leaching to achieve comparable uranium extraction rates. So a trade-off.
More energy intensive, perhaps.
Often, yes. Catalysts, such as copper and ammonia, were sometimes used to enhance the oxidation of uranium in these alkaline solutions.
Interesting additions.
Gittus briefly mentions an industrial-scale application at Lens, in France, where sodium carbonate was used to extract uranium from schists. There were even experimental efforts in Yugoslavia exploring the possibility of extracting uranium from fuel ash using alkaline leaching, finding uranium wherever they could.
Once you've dissolved the uranium, either with acid or alkali, you're left with a uranium-rich liquid and a solid residue, the leftover rock. This is where filtration and decantation become essential to separate them.
Exactly. These separation steps are crucial for recovering the uranium-bearing solution, often called the pregnant leach liquor, or PLS.
Pregnant liquor.
Okay, from the solid waste, or tailings. Filtration involves passing the slurry through a porous medium, like a cloth filter, to trap the solid particles.
Like making coffee.
A very large-scale industrial version, yes. While decantation relies on allowing the solids to settle out of the liquid under gravity in large tanks.
Let gravity do the work.
To accelerate the settling process and improve the clarity of the liquid, flocculating agents, chemicals that cause fine particles to aggregate into larger clumps, or flocks were often added to the slurry.
Make the solids heavier.
Get them clumped together so they settle faster, yes. Table 3.3 demonstrates the effect of different reagents on the settling rate and the clarity of the filtrate. Figures 3.9 and 3.11 provide visual explanations of the flocculation process and its results.
Okay.
Gittus also describes the use of thickeners, which are large settling tanks, and the more sophisticated countercurrent decantation CCD system, where the solids are washed multiple times with progressively cleaner solutions to maximize the recovery of dissolved uranium. Get every last bit out.
Very thorough. Now we're getting into some more advanced chemical separation techniques with ion exchange extraction. This sounds like selectively grabbing the uranium ions from the liquid.
That's a good way to describe it. Ion exchange is particularly effective for recovering uranium from relatively dilute leach solutions, the pregnant liquor we mentioned.
Okay.
The process involves passing the solution through beds of resin beads that are specifically designed to selectively absorb uranyl ions, the form in which uranium typically exists in these solutions, like UO2, SO434, and sulfate solutions.
So the resin acts like a magnet for uranium ions.
In a chemical sense, yes. There's a chemical equilibrium involved in this absorption process, which is influenced by factors such as the concentration of sulfate or carbonate ions in the solution, depending on whether it originated from an acid or alkaline leach.
Right.
Elution, the next phase, involves passing a different chemical solution through the resin bed to displace the adsorbed uranium ions, thereby recovering the uranium in a much more concentrated form. You wash the uranium off the resin.
Getting it concentrated.
Exactly. Factors like pH, uranium concentration in the feed solution, and the concentration of sulfate ions, as illustrated in figures 3.13, 3.17, and 3.18, all play a significant role in the efficiency of both the adsorption and elution stages. It's a careful balancing act.
It sounds like these ion exchange resins are quite specialized. Were there any issues or challenges associated with their use?
Oh, yes. Gittus discusses several factors that could affect the performance of ion exchange resins. Resin capacity, how much uranium it can hold, and the hydraulic characteristics, how easily the liquid flows through, were important considerations for efficient operation.
Can't clog up.
Exactly. Resins could also be poisoned or fouled by certain ions present in the leach solution, which stick to the resin instead of uranium, or just block the sites.
What kind of things?
Things like polycethionate ions, depicted in Figure 3.20, cobalt cyanide complexes, and even fine silica particles that could precipitate and block the active sites on the resin beads. The book even provides some of the relevant chemical reactions involved in these poisoning mechanisms.
So you had to keep the resin clean and effective.
A constant challenge in many mills.
Finally, we have solvent extraction as another key method for concentrating uranium. How does this differ from ion exchange? Is it using liquids instead of solid resins?
That's the main difference, yes. Solvent extraction provides an alternative way to selectively remove uranium from aqueous solutions, the PLS. It involves using organic solvents that are immiscible with water they don't mix, like oil and water.
Okay.
These solvents contain specific extracting chemicals, such as alkylamines, alkyl phosphoric acids like OPA, and tributyl phosphate, TBP.
TBP, that sounds familiar from later reprocessing too.
Yes, it's a very versatile extractant. These chemicals have a chemical affinity for uranium compounds under certain conditions.
So they pull the uranium out of the water.
Exactly. When the aqueous solution containing uranium is mixed vigorously with the organic solvent, the uranium preferentially transfers into the organic phase.
Okay.
The two phases are then allowed to separate, and the uranium can be recovered from the organic solvent in a concentrated form through a process called stripping.
Stripping.
Where the organic phase is contacted with another aqueous solution, often acidic or salty, that favors the transfer of uranium back into the aqueous phase, but now in a much purer, more concentrated form.
So move it to organic, then back to a clean water-based solution.
That's the basic idea. Gittus outlines some of the underlying chemistry, particularly for amine extraction, providing equations for the extraction and stripping reactions. Figure 3.4 shows uranium extraction coefficients with amines under different conditions.
Right.
And while Figure 4.5, showing europium distribution, might seem out of place here in Chapter 3, it likely served as an illustrative example of selective extraction principles, how you can separate one element from others.
I see. And this was used commercially?
Oh, yes. Commercial uranium processing plants, such as the Fernald plant in the U.S., utilized TBP for solvent extraction. And even diethyl ether was employed in some earlier processes, though ether is quite hazardous.
Right, flammable.
The book also includes a general equilibrium expression for solvent extraction, highlighting the reversible nature of the process and the factors influencing the transfer.
It's quite remarkable to realize just how intricate these early steps in obtaining usable uranium were, involving such a diverse range of physical and chemical techniques. It wasn't simple at all.
Absolutely. What truly stands out is the level of ingenuity and, frankly, experimentation that characterized the development of these processes in the mid-20th century, as uranium's significance was rapidly escalating.
They were figuring it out as they went, almost.
To a large extent, yes. It wasn't simply a matter of digging up ore. It demanded a deep understanding of geology, mineralogy, chemistry, and engineering to effectively extract and concentrate this valuable element.
So what's the takeaway for you, our listener? Think about this. The foundational processes we've explored today, from pinpointing where uranium ores are located in the minerals they're found in, to the initial detection and mining efforts, and those crucial first steps in concentration using physical methods and sophisticated chemical techniques like leaching, filtration, ion exchange, and solvent extraction were the essential groundwork.
The absolute foundation.
Consider the sheer complexity involved in scaling up these initial laboratory findings and pilot plant operations to meet the burgeoning demands of the nuclear age. What immense engineering and scientific hurdles do you think those early pioneers faced in making that leap?
Enormous challenges.
It really underscores the incredible journey of this element, even before it enters the more well-known stages of the nuclear fuel cycle. What further innovations and refinements do you think built upon these early techniques to shape the uranium processing we know today? It's a fascinating path of discovery to consider.